Hello everybody, and welcome to this applicant experience video which we're offering online for the very first time. My name's Craig and it's my pleasure to be your guide today as we're looking at the 4 courses that are offered at the Institute of Criminal Justice Studies here at the University of Portsmouth. The 4 courses are Criminology and Criminal Justice, Criminology and Forensic Studies, Criminology with Psychology, and last but not least, Criminology with Cybercrime. These 4 areas, although they're individual degree programmes, they come together to give a holistic view of looking at an investigation. All these elements together will help us solve the case. And today, to do that, we're going to be looking at a real case that actually landed on police desks a couple of years ago. So I'm going to ask you to put yourself in the shoes of an investigator. In particular, imagine that you are in the police service and you're in charge of this case. Okay, we're going to stop the video occasionally for you to have a think about what you would do if faced with this information, so do pay attention. The case is that of Helen Bailey, who went missing in 2016. She wrote these books that you're seeing on the screen right now, so she was a bit of a storyteller and you're going to hear her story now. The first thing you want to do when you're encountering a missing persons case, which is my own area of expertise, is learn a little bit about that person. So let's do that now. Who was Helen? Here she is. This is Helen. So she was born in 1964. So if she went missing in 2016, that makes her 52 at the time of disappearance. And you can see her pictured there with her little animal friend Boris, who she went everywhere with. She was an avid animal lover, and Boris in particular was her best friend. She was a creative sort and liked to, in school, write little stories. And while she initially trained as a forensic scientist, which many of you might be having a bit of resonance with right now, she eventually decided to join the media career. And in doing so, when she was working her way up the ladder, she met her husband, John. Eventually, she became very, very successful and wrote a number of best-selling children's books and young adult fiction. You may have read some of these yourself. And she went on to win a number of awards. So far, no particular warning signs yet. However, Helen became very successful. She moved into this big mansion here, and she had this lovely car. You can see it there, nice BMW. So we're thinking about someone that we know eventually goes missing. She's got a bit of money, so maybe someone was interested in getting their hands on that fortune. Helen's known as a bubbly, energetic sort of person, and her and John and little Boris there, when he comes along, have a nice happy life. However, unfortunately, John passes away during an accident while they're on holiday together. He decides to take a swim in the ocean, and sadly for John, he gets swept away, and Helen witnesses this. She develops a bit of a guilt complex around what's happened and has a hard time coping thereafter. So unfortunately, people who go missing, they often do so in this context of having an underlying issue or a mental health problem. Oftentimes they go off to just seek some alone time. However, occasionally they do go off to do something more serious, such as hurt themselves. So that's the kind of thing we do need to be keeping in mind. Okay, so far, a lot of money, someone who potentially has some mental health problems, and if she's very friendly and energetic, maybe she's made the wrong friend at a certain point in time who wants to take advantage. Thankfully, Helen's life takes a bit of a positive turn. While she's coping with the grief of losing John, she frequents a number of grief forums. And on those she gets to become quite well known, and she even writes a book about her experience of grieving. Thankfully, things take a bit of a positive turn in Helen's life. While she's on these grief forums, she meets another person who's lost their partner, Ian, and he becomes her new fiancé. She describes him as her grey-haired Prince Charming, and by all accounts he makes her very happy. Ian had lost his own wife a couple of years earlier after she had a fit in the garden. Ian's got 2 adult sons. That creates a little bit of a different situation for Helen, as she hadn't had children before, and there's a little bit of tension there too. Ian is a little bit different from Helen. He's quieter, he's a bit more reserved, and he's got some health issues. He has a bit of a hard time getting around, and he has to go to the doctor quite frequently. He moves into the big house with Helen and Boris, and by all accounts things are going quite well. So I hope you've been paying attention. We're right in the lead up to the missing episode now. Helen continues to be sad about John's death, and she thinks about it a lot. That can create a bit of tension in a new relationship if the old relationship keeps coming up. However, the same problem is present with Ian as well, who's lost his own partner. Worth really keeping in mind is that in the immediate lead up to the missing episode, Helen begins to behave very strangely. She's behaving erratically, she's reporting feeling very drowsy. She mentioned to friends that she just can't concentrate and her mind feels like it's very fuzzy and that she forgets what she's doing and suddenly becomes aware that she's in the middle of something she didn't even realise she'd started. She also suffers from narcolepsy, which is just falling asleep on the spot. That's quite interesting if we're thinking that Helen's about to go missing, because if someone goes missing in that situation, they can get into all sorts of problems. Imagine if she were to get a bit confused and lost and encounter some water when missing the dog. It could be a very bad outcome. Okay? Right, we're ready for you guys to come in now. Helen's gone missing. This case lands on your desk. You're an investigator, you're a police officer, and you're thinking, how are we going to get the necessary evidence to solve this case? So, some facts that you've got. Helen's been reported missing on the 15th of April, but was actually last seen a few days earlier on the 11th of April. Think how far you could get in 4 days. And you might start thinking, why was she reported missing 4 days later? You want to get a head start, don't you? So, you might be thinking, well, Ian's the one reported missing, why did it take him so long? She's got Boris with her. That's good. It's probably something that you want. She's going to take care of Boris, and it might create some evidence. She might be doing things to take care of Boris that would produce some kind of trail of purchases, for example. Helen's left a note that said she was needing some time alone. That's what we already know that about missing people. That's something that we do. So you could reach out to friends and family to see if she's gone to any of them. At the moment, though, she doesn't seem to have done so. We know Helen has a holiday cabin. That's somewhere else you could look. It's in a place called Broadstairs, about 3 hours drive away from where the couple live normally in Hertfordshire. However, she's not driven there in her own car. It's still in the driveway. We do know, though, that Helen likes to use rail and that she sometimes travels by taxi. She's quite a lot of money, and she doesn't like driving that much. She's had a few near accidents in the past. So that's another couple of things to keep in mind. And last, and sadly not least, a man's been seen dumping suspicious objects in the area recently. Now, if someone's gone missing, they've been missing for a little while, someone dumping things around isn't good news. Okay? Right, we're going to pause briefly, and you are going to have a little bit of a think. So write down some notes, just think in your head, and we'll start again in a minute. But you're in charge of the investigation. What resources do you want to deploy? What kinds of evidence are you going to look for to try and generate some leads and find out what's happened to Helen and hopefully recover her alive? Okay. I'm going to leave you with this image on the screen. This is the immediate area where Helen lives, so the red circle is where her house is. You can see a little railway station symbol, and there's some fields that you might want to search as well. So have a think, what would you deploy? We'll be back in a minute or two to see if your suggestions match some other suggestions. Welcome back. So hopefully you've managed to think of a few things that you might want to do. To help us, we can think about the 4 degree programs that we've got. We've got criminal justice, psychology, forensics, and cybercrime. There's all sorts of evidence there we can think about. So let's take it from the top. You're in charge of the investigation. You're directing some police officers. You can have them do all sorts of things. They can do a bit of a door-to-door. You could have them maybe talk to Ian. And you could even search the surrounding area, look at all those fields and the trees and so on. Police officers themselves might not be the people you want doing that. You've only got so much manpower at disposal, but you can call upon volunteer searchers who will look in a very methodical way, and you can even deploy search dogs who can do it really quickly. If you want to get really fancy, you can get the helicopter or the drones out. They can cover that really quickly. Other things you might want to be doing, you've got a few leads. You could be talking to Helen's family, see where she's turned up, or if she's turned up. You could, in talking to Ian, you can maybe be starting to think, well, psychologically, there's a few things we might want to do. You could think, well, is he being truthful? There's a number of techniques we can think about. Or, from another perspective, you think, well, what's the best way to approach someone who's grieving? This person has ostensibly lost their partner. So you need to be treating them sensitively. Forensically, people leave traces all over the place. There's a principle known as Locard's exchange principle. Anytime you touch anything, you leave a trace of yourself behind, and that's going to be true of Helen as well. So you can think about where she's been, where Boris has been, and try to look for evidence there. If you start at the house, for example, you're going to find lots of evidence of Helen, but it might not be that useful. She lives there, and so does Ian. So you're going to find evidence of both of them there. However, if you find evidence of her in the field 3 miles away, that's a bit more interesting. In terms of cyber information, Helen's got a mobile phone that's pumping out information left, right and centre that you can potentially pick up on. Think about the GPS in your phone. It can tell where you are. That's going to be really useful when we're looking for Helen. Okay? So, the investigation progresses. Let's see what we've got. Okay. The police thought of a number of these things, and so did Helen's friends and family. They called Helen to try to see if they could find her, but her phone doesn't respond. It runs out of battery actually quite quickly, and it just goes straight to voicemail after a day or so. That's quite normal. Ian does come under suspicion, but he maintains that Helen's just gone for a walk, and the police don't think he's suspicious at all. They decide, okay, this person's getting involved in the investigation. They're helping us to launch the media appeal. Let's leave them alone. They search through the home. As we just talked about, looking through the home, you're not going to find anything in particular because Helen lives there. There's going to be lots of evidence of her. However, there's a number of things forensically you could look at. We've got the letter. You could look at that for evidence that Helen's touched it. You could do handwriting analysis and so on. If the letter was written digitally, you could look at the computer to see when it was made. Has it been tampered with? Is it what it seems to be? No evidence at the holiday home either when the police first investigate it. No sign that she's been there. They looked at CCTV. They went to the train station. No sign that she's used that. They went to the taxi ranks. No sign she's used that. People leave all sorts of trails behind them, including transaction histories. Nothing there either. Helen doesn't seem to have spent any money. We're starting to get a little bit concerned now because think about it. Think how often that you spend money when you're out and about, how often your card gets used if you've got one, how often your phone gets used. We should be starting to see some evidence, but we're not. The family and Ian launched an appeal in the press. Usually that's a good thing, however it generates a lot of sightings, and they're not always accurate, and that creates a bit of a burden on the police. They've got to investigate all these now, and a lot of them, because of the way memory works, and that's something you'll learn about when you examine psychology, it doesn't necessarily translate into accurate sightings. Another thing about appeals is, although it's out there, how often do you spend looking at them? How well would you recognise someone based on an appeal poster? These are the psychological principles we can use to help find missing people and to investigate crime. Okay. The plot thickens, however, and Helen is eventually found, and it was pretty close to home. This is their family home from an aerial view, and this is their garage. As you can see, there are police and forensic technicians already there. They've cordoned off the area already, so they have to do that to prevent anyone going in or out so that the evidence doesn't get contaminated. It's quite a big area, and you can see the people there in their suits already. Okay. Some more images show as we close in on the garage, which again has been cordoned off. They've got their tent there to prevent further contamination. That there's a hatch in the floor, and the police found out about this almost by accident. They happened to ask someone that previously lived at the house some questions, and they disclosed that there was something under the garage. If we look into the garage, at the top there with all the debris, you can see what the garage normally looked like. Pretty full, you wouldn't necessarily find anything, but when all that's removed, there's that hatch there, and it's been sellotaped shut. To prevent disturbing it forensically, we got search and rescue experts in, and they excavated under the garage. And as you can see there on the image on the bottom right of the screen, underneath the garage was a cesspit, which was very well hidden and not well seen. And sadly, Helen was found in the cesspit. Okay, so we're starting to get a clearer picture, and things are starting to look really quite suspicious. So Helen and Boris sadly both found in there. It's just Helen, Boris, some bin liners, a pillowcase and a dog toy. We can still do some tests. Toxicology indicates that Helen had drugs in her system, insomnia medication, and the cause of death appears to have been asphyxiation. However, at this point, we don't know if this was before or after she's in the cesspit. And there are indications that she was still alive when she went into the cesspit. Okay, right, I'm going to stop again briefly. What do you think's happened? Why has it happened in this way? What's the motive? Or has it been an accident of some kind? And remember, if you think that something untoward's happened, you think there's been a crime, you need to prove this in court. with all the types of evidence that we've talked about so far. So take a minute or two to think, and we'll come back in a moment to compare your theories with some other potentially plausible ideas. Okay? Hello again, and we've got our 4 evidence areas to talk about. I'll give you a bit of a heads up. Ian was the person responsible for Helen's disappearance, and you might have sussed that out yourself already. But there's all sorts of evidence that we've got. CCTV found Ian going to the tip just after Helen was reported missing, and he appeared to be disposing of a duvet. Now, as a forensics person, you want that duvet. It's got all sorts of information on it. It would have potentially bodily fluids, might have hair, and you can do all sorts with that. However, CCTV found Ian going back to the dump, and unfortunately, the duvet was disposed of. You don't have it as evidence anymore. You went to find the letter. Turns out there was no letter. There was no evidence of it ever having existed. Ian said it had been chucked out, but it hadn't been written anywhere, hadn't been typed anywhere. As far as we know, there is no letter. Psychology-wise, there are some fishy things about the way Ian was behaving. In his call to the police initially to report Helen missing, he was asked some questions about Helen's eye colour, and he couldn't remember. He couldn't remember her date of birth either. That's because he'd rehearsed the story in his head, and he was asked some questions he hadn't expected, and it threw him completely off guard. There are a number of videos online that you can watch of Ian's behaviour when he's being talked to by police, and he's behaving very strangely because essentially he's making up the facts as he goes along. The thing that actually rumbled Ian was digital evidence. He took Helen's phone, he had it on, still on him for whatever reason, and he went to their holiday home in Broadstairs. There it was picked up by the router. You might not know this, but every time your phone goes past the router, it connects to it automatically pretty much, the router records that information. The police were able to capture that, and they found that even after Helen had been missing and was likely already dead, that her phone had turned up at Broadstairs even though she hadn't been there. Ian had taken it there. Ian made up an alternative story. Now, as good investigators, you have to investigate all avenues. If you just assume what was Ian, you're going to cause some problems in court. So Ian suggested that some associates of Helen had kidnapped her. They'd forced Ian to do all these things, go to the tip, hide that she'd been disposed of in the cesspit, and they'd broken into the home. However, we're back to our physical forensics again. There's going to be so much evidence of that, and no evidence was ever found. There was no fingerprints, no signs of entry, no struggle, nothing. It looked like Ian had done it. Okay? So, that leaves us thinking, how on earth could they miss Ian? How could police have missed him? It's a very good question. There was all sorts of suspicious things about Ian. He stood to inherit a lot of money. He joked about hiding a body in the cesspit amongst his friends. He involved himself in the investigation. That's classic kind of guilty behaviour, even though innocent people do it too. And he didn't seem to be taking the disappearance that seriously. He had a Chinese on the night she went missing, and he went on a holiday that he and Helen had previously booked. Digitally again, a lot of money from Helen's account suddenly started going into Ian's account too, so pretty fishy. However, it's just as we said before, if you don't investigate every avenue, you can cause all sorts of problems. The investigator in charge of the case said he wouldn't have changed a thing, because if they'd gone gung-ho for Ian, they likely would have caused a mistrial because they hadn't investigated him fairly. You'll learn about, in your studies, a concept of tunnel vision. Police cannot have tunnel vision, investigators cannot have tunnel vision and bias because it leads to negative results. You have to think of every eventuality and not go all guns blazing after the person you think it is. As far as we knew to start with, Ian was a grieving husband. Okay, and I'll leave you with that. I hope you found that interesting. If you're interested in finding out more about any of the courses that we offer or the one that you've applied to study, here's some information about the relevant course leaders, and they'd be more than happy to take any questions you've got. Thank you very much, and I hope you found it interesting, and I hope to see you when you join us here at Portsmouth. Bye bye.